Shalom, loved ones. In this video, in our series in the Gospel of John, I'd like to offer some reflections on John chapter 18, verses 1 through 14, when Jesus is arrested in the garden. In mid-May, I saw dozens of reactions on social media to an Instagram post shared by the former director of the FBI, James Comey, which he has since deleted. The post was a photo of some seashells he saw while he was at the beach, and the shells had been arranged to write out a 4-digit number, 8647. Underneath the photo, Comey wrote this caption: "Cool shell formation on my beach walk." Shortly after that, the Secret Service opened an investigation of Comey about the post, because the number 86 can be taken to mean that someone should be killed, and the number 47 is a popular shorthand for the current president. Did Comey mean to call for the assassination of the current president? He denies it, as do all of the president's critics, to my knowledge. Regardless, the post was certainly understood by many, including the Secret Service, as a death threat. About 2,000 years ago, there was another public figure whose life was threatened by the powers that be. But the plot was not broadcast far and wide like the supposed intentions of James Comey. Instead, it was planned in secret and carried out in secret. On Thursday evening, after Jesus had dined with his disciples, they went to a secluded place where John 18:2 says Jesus had often met with his disciples. The religious leaders had been looking for an opportunity to arrest Jesus, but they didn't want it to happen in a public place so they could avoid causing a riot. Who knows why Judas agreed to work with the religious leaders to execute their plan? Was it pure greed? John's Gospel does say that Judas used to help himself to the common purse quite regularly, and other Gospel accounts record that he was paid 30 pieces of silver for his cooperation with the authorities. Still others theorize that Judas did what he did because he believed a flashpoint was necessary for Jesus to assume his rightful place as Messiah. In any case, Judas knew that Jesus was going to the secluded spot that evening, so he left the dinner early to alert the authorities. It would be the perfect opportunity to take Jesus into custody without causing a ruckus. Still, the religious authorities treated it like a military operation. They sent their own detachment of armed soldiers and officials. Seeing the power play, Simon Peter drew his sword and cut off the right ear of Malchus, servant of the high priest. But Jesus would have none of it. He immediately told Peter to put his sword away, and in Luke's Gospel we learn that Jesus healed the wound with a gentle touch of his hand. In John's telling of the scene, the apostle layers the narrative with rich significance through the use of symbols and words that carry a double meaning. And all of it places Jesus at the center. First, Jesus sees that they are looking for him, and instead of waiting for them to find him, he shows himself to them willingly and asks, "Who is it you want?" The question is filled with irony because Jesus knows there are many people who want him in a positive sense. That is to say, they desire to know him and his ways and to remain with him. But this group wants none of that. They simply want him in a negative sense. That is to say, they want him to go away. He's a troublemaker. And when they answer his question about who they want, He responds by saying, I am. Most translations render Jesus' response here as, I am he. But the Greek manuscript literally just says, I am. Now, this is significant because Jesus is not just identifying himself as Jesus of Nazareth here in response to their question and who they're looking for, but he is also invoking God's name, which means I am. Throughout John's Gospel, John has built up to this encounter by using the I am designation in connection with Jesus at key points. I am the bread of life, he says in John 6. Before Abraham was born, I am, he says in John 8. I am the gate, and I am the good shepherd, he says in John 10. I am the resurrection and the life, he says in John 11. I am the way and the truth and the life, he says in John 14. I am the vine, he says in John 15. John has been trying to tell us all along that Jesus is God made flesh, the great I am. So when he invoked God's name in the garden in the words, I am, the people drew back and fell to the ground as if he was God. It is no surprise that here John records a repetition of Jesus' question, who is it you want? Once again, the question carries a double meaning in that it directly applies to what they were there to do, to arrest him, but it also highlights the essence of their reaction to Jesus' I am statement. They drew back and fell to the ground. In one sense, they did so because they were merely afraid of him. In another sense, however, their response was akin to that of worship. A deep wanting, desiring and yearning for God such that it knocks us off our feet and drives us to the ground in humility, just like it did to those who were there to arrest him that evening. Jesus then repeats his self-identification as God made flesh. I told you, I am, he says, and insists they let his disciples go so that the disciples may not fall prey to the authorities' intentions. With that, Jesus draws a sword Peter draws a sword and injures Malchus. And Jesus says, put your sword away. If ever there was a text the church in the United States today needs to live up to, it is this text. It's a narrative that calls us to desire what Jesus desires by reminding us of his lordship and how we are called to respond to his lordship. I am. Put your sword away, Jesus says. Between these two phrases in this text lies the sum total of how Jesus invites his followers to live in the world today and why we are to live that way. In the face of those who were there to do him violence, Jesus embodies a nonviolent response and tells Peter to follow suit. He does this because he knows who he is, so there is no need to power up. He is the I am, who will not wield a sword. I am. Put your sword away, he says. I am. Put your sword away. Sadly, many churches in America today have been infected by the same virus that caused the religious leaders to bow down before Jesus one moment and then crucify him the very next day. In the same way, on this very day in the United States, sanctuaries all across the land have been filled already with congregants lifting their hands and bowing their heads in acts of worship, proclaiming Jesus to be the great I am. But then tomorrow they will tune in to their usual political propaganda, pushing an agenda to take America back for Christ by militant means, no less. In today's text, Peter here shows us how easy it is to imitate the ways of the empire whose agents bow before God one moment, then betray God's ways the next moment by resorting to power and control. The philosopher René Girard describes this phenomenon as the mimesis of desire. It's when we see one group desiring something, namely power, and we get caught up in the desire for the same thing. This creates the conditions for conflict as different parties compete for supremacy, power, and control to achieve the object of their desire, power and control, to the exclusion of others. This is what produces the cycle of violence that we see today. It's a destructive cycle because it perpetuates the mindset that certain persons need to be sacrificed for the good of society. In other words, Girard says we create scapegoats by which we lay all the problems of society on the backs of others, anyone who is not like us, anyone who challenges our sense of comfort and security, anyone we regard as a troublemaker. And we do all this so that our group may obtain power and control. It's a vicious cycle. In today's America, the scapegoating sounds like this. The Democrats and Joe Biden are to blame, or the Republicans are to blame, or the immigrants are dragging us down. We need to get rid of them. It's transgender people. It's the gay agenda. Our country has become too woke. DEI is our enemy. International students are the problem. Send them away and bar them from coming. Like Caiaphas of old, we take shelter in the shadow of our temples, hiding in the sham of our so-called worship that permits us to coddle our scapegoating hatreds in the name of God, no less. We say it's better for the sake of the many that we sacrifice the one. It is blasphemy, pure and simple. But Jesus knows our games and calls us to something better. I am. Put your sword away, he says. With these words, he calls us to disrupt the cycle of violence through a full embodiment of nonviolent love, not just in our Sunday services, but through our everyday lives. He says, you cannot follow me and lay the troubles of our world on the backs of others at the same time. You cannot follow me and use the power-up tactics of the world. Stop your scapegoating and stop trying to control everyone all the time. I do believe that our country is heading soon to an inevitable flashpoint, similar to the moment Judas instigated that night so long ago in the garden. We are repeating history in the sense that the current moment of violence is being brought about in the name of God, and even through those who identify as his followers. In today's text, Jesus makes clear what it means to be his true follower, however. He says, I am. Put your sword away. So dearly beloved, let us recommit ourselves in this pivotal time of history to embody Jesus' way of nonviolent love. May we truly know Jesus as the great I am, and out of that deep, deep knowing, may we have courage to put our swords away as he commands. May we desire not only what he wants, but may we want him for himself alone, just for all that he himself is. May we worship him truly, not out of fear, but out of sheer adoration and love. For he has given of himself to all in nothing more than self-giving love. May our lives reflect his self-giving love so that we too can say with him, I am who I am, I know who I am and whose I am. I am God's beloved child, a peacemaker and strong in love and love alone. I wield no sword, not even in my speaking or thinking or feeling. Take a deep look. You will find no violence in me, only peace. May it be so with us, dearly beloved. May it be so with us.